know we were discussing it the other day, like how can we get involved? We're feeling this call, like what could we possibly do? And we were trying to dream up like, art activism or something that we could do to like really send some support, something beyond just visualizing and praying for them, but really like doing something fundamental and taking some action. And it just came, through like the Monarch gathering that I was already planning to do, as I've been doing Monarch releases for several years, and you participated in some of them, and it's just so magical. I thought, well, why don't we just do a fundraiser for Standing Rock, and just, everyone can sponsor a Monarch and bring the resources that they're able to share with this, need at the moment, and then just raise some awareness. And it's so, inspiring to partner up with Red Lightning and learn about what they're doing to really fundamentally shift the balance of power and to really empower these people to do their sacred work, and stand there for us all, really. So it's some way that we can, it's a small way that we can contribute. So I wanted to introduce you a little bit about, just where you come from and how we got here to this place together.
Cool.
Can you tell me a little bit about your path?
I feel like the Monarchs kind of brought us together. My grandparents being biologists and being there in Mexico as they were discovering the place that the Monarchs go to every year. But just the idea that when the caterpillar creates the chrysalis, it liquefies who it was in order to consume the energy of what it was. And that's how it's able to transform into the next permutation of itself. When I think of what they do, that liquefaction, it connected me to that place that I think many of us have been, where we don't see the future from where we are. We don't see things getting better. We just see a wall. That place of despair, of the lowest you can go, that you can't even imagine until you've been there. It puts me in contact with my experience of hopelessness and despair at the end of the road of the life form I've been. And that's what I feel like the Monarchs show me, is that willingness to completely abandon whatever they've known, whatever they've been.
It's not sustainable. Like, they get to a point where they're so big they have to change. In a sense, like they've come to the end of that process. Mm-hmm. I guess it's just this idea of like transformational power and metamorphosis and like rising above everything that's known. And for me, in working with the Monarchs, they've really guided me back into, my native blood and the heritage that I've had. And I've become more close to and living with nature and practicing more sustainable sacred practices, and really understanding that this is something that my ancestors envisioned for me, and understanding that, through the generations, Leela is 7th generation from my great-great-great-grandmother, who was an Iroquois Seneca princess. I was born into a family that was extremely chaotic in a sense. My parents had several children. I was the third, and I was like the indomitable spirit, and I was the first one of those that they'd had. And my mom had my sister before my brother, my sister, and then me, and she said, oh, they come in different flavors. She thought that like every girl would be the same, but I was very different. I was extremely independent, and I also was very resistant to any of the techniques that they were using to try to control me. So they had kind of an issue on their hand, and my parents took steps to try to dominate me, or to try to control me in some way, through fear, through terrorizing me, telling me bad people were going to take me, whatever it was. Like, just they had these programs that they were trying to implement, and I was very resistant. I was, in some way, like born a revolutionary in a sense. Just in that system, it didn't work for me.
I see it. We have a little bit of a different background in that my mom was really trying to protect me, largely by limiting my freedom, which obviously we share that sort of rebellious spirit that's not going to be contained. So that was causing some friction between us. But also I was watching the patterns of her relationships. And I think something that really was helping me was that I was keeping a journal. And so I was able to reflect on my own behavior in my relationships.
That really helped me too. That was kind of the beginning. Yeah.
And by the time I moved to Europe, where I was really at the end of this icky relationship, nothing in my life had been more degrading than this relationship. I'd been pregnant and had an abortion. I felt shameful around that whole experience. He had gotten someone else pregnant while we were together. That was super painful. And I remember being on the phone with my dad, and I was so at the place of wishing for self-annihilation that I didn't know what to do and who to turn to, and I didn't feel like I had anyone I could talk to about the way I was feeling. I felt like if anyone knew how suicidal I was, how many times a day I was thinking of stepping in front of a bus or jumping off a balcony, that that was so shameful also. But my dad, luckily for me, had always been kind of emotionally neutral. Well, in certain ways at least. He was able to process, we could have conversations about drugs or about sex that were very neutral. He wasn't activated. We didn't talk that much, but on one phone call from my bedroom in Paris, I just went for it, and I told him the whole thing. Told him the embarrassing revelation that I wasn't a good person, and that I didn't treat people well, and that I looked back over my whole life and I just saw where I had been a liar, and where I had been not authentic, and where I had done what I needed to do to get what I needed, even at the expense of other people. And I just felt like I should die. He listened, and I was clearly really upset. And at the end of what I said, he said, "Well, it sounds really good. Sounds like a good place to start." And I was just blown away. I did not expect that sounds good when I'm talking about feeling suicidal. But he understood that it's painful to come to clarity about a situation that's not sustainable. And so he was honoring my place of pain and saying, don't worry about where you are. Where you are is a good place to be. Just keep going from there. And that really gave me courage.
You mentioned also the journaling. Do you still journal?
I don't. And it's less like it was before. Before, I was chronicling what would happen, the conversations that would happen, what I said, what other people said. And there was just a little bit of kind of feeling, because as I said, I wasn't okay with, or I didn't know how.
You were kind of mapping the chaos in a sense.
Yeah, I was just saying, this is what happened, and this happened, and
or
this
mapping
happened.
the patterns. Mapping the patterns. That's exactly what I was doing when I was a teenager. I had kind of an opposite experience. When I felt, brave enough to share my story, I felt bullied
What
by
happened?
it. I was sharing. There were a couple ways that it happened pretty quickly around when I was 9 years old. And my older sister had shared a bit about my abuse, and then she had told some friends, and so on the playground, this girl that was very spirited came up to me and tried to embarrass me about it in front of all of these other kids on the playground.
You told your sister, and then your sister told this girl?
Mm-hmm. So I felt very betrayed by my sister, and then I told a group of friends that were part of my church group. We had a sleepover, and I shared with them. And they, when I was the first one to fall asleep, so. My family knew of all of the abuse, so I had siblings to discuss it with, but this was my first time sharing it with any friend or anyone outside of my family. My grandparents didn't even know. And when I fell asleep, they played a bunch of pranks on me. And I woke up kind of in a terror, feeling like I had no idea what had happened and why I had things in my sleeping, in my nightgown, and why, where these things came from and where my clothes were, and just things that kind of mimic some of my abuse. Like they took my story and kind of turned it on me in a sense. But I felt, in those moments so deeply betrayed. And then when I started journaling, my brother told me that he had caught my father reading my journals, and so I just felt betrayed on a whole nother level, like that my own family, and I'm trying to kind of reflect and process this crazy abuse that they've contributed to, and now they're trying to trace my thoughts and find another way of manipulation or dominating me, even in my mind space, where I feel is such a sacred space of total freedom. And it was so heavily manipulative. And so when I see things, like these types of domination tactics at Standing Rock, trying to infiltrate, trying to track people, trying to intimidate them, trying to get into this peaceful resistance, this peaceful protest that's really protecting what is sacred to us all.
And it's like you telling your story. They're saying, hey, this is an abuse. This is something we've been suffering. And instead of getting support, there's the status quo that tries to keep them locked in that paradigm of being dominated. And one of the things that's inspiring about the call coming from Standing Rock is it feels like the call is saying, we are all one. This is a resource we all need. We all need to come together around this. It's good to connect about something that we both feel strongly deserves attention, even if we're not in this moment sending money to them, even just kind of converging on the topic and letting our ideas crystallize feels like part of the solution. Just in the same way that my dad being able to hear me in that moment was him sharing whatever his personal evolution was to make space for me to be who I was in that moment. I feel that from you, that your personal evolution means that you're able to hold space for me when I'm talking about how this stuff impacts me personally or where I've been. So thanks for your work. Being able to provide that receiving capacity for my truth too.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are we done?